If you've watched Mutant Mayhem, this series does exactly as advertised. Shellheads, the time has finally come. We are digging into Tales from the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, the newest addition to the pantheon that is Turtles on TV. This is a good use of real estate to build a miniseries that connects movie to movie. And let's be honest, growing up, for those of us that grew up with Saturday morning cartoons, which I'm guessing is most of us, there was always an excitement around any opportunity that you got to have a movie adaptation of this show, especially if it was set in the same continuity. I mean, there are tons of examples of this over the years, and that's exactly what this offers the new generation. Largely, I thought it was a good addition to the different flavors of Turtles storytelling. And the reality is, being a Turtles fan, you've got to understand that not every single adaptation is for every single person. If you're able to have that framework, then you're able to step into this show with an appropriate level of expectation. So this came out a couple of weeks ago, and I feel like this show has accomplished something that not many Turtles adaptations accomplish, and that's surprising the fan base. And this one's a little interesting to me because there's very little in the way of missed time as far as the movie and this series goes. They're meant to be pretty lock and key with each other, and having watched Mutant Mayhem, it has a particular tone. That particular tone is 100% carried over into the series. It's not 2003, which was basically an animated version of the Mirage comics. It's not even 2012. That's more of a lighthearted take on the more mystical, more action-packed versions of the Turtles, which let me know below if you want me to create a guide to being able to find your flavor of the Turtles. But other than the animation being slightly changed in this movie, it's largely just a continuation, and that's exactly what it advertises itself to be. I think the animation being slightly different and slightly cleaner is ultimately a net positive. After 12 episodes, having that animation would probably get old. And there's something too in content that is so seamless, keeping something special about the big screen adaptations. The cast is largely the same, with the exception of a couple of notes that they handle with intentionality. All in all, this show goes harder than it necessarily has to. With a show like this, it's very easy for it to become 87 in that wilderness period of season 3 to season 7, where it's basically an unending toy commercial, definitely shorter on story and substance. This, every single step of the way, was using the time to either build the characters or build the story around it. Yes, lighthearted, yes, with the idea being that the core audience is absolutely younger. All in all, it is very self-aware, very meta, and I think that's a very smart choice in a world where a younger generation is way more well informed of everything that's going on than maybe we were when we were growing up with the Turtles, which speaks to how good a job that they had for giving in-universe reasons why things were slightly different or why things were happening in comparison to the movie. I would 100% recommend this for younger shellheads as an on-ramp into TMNT. I think for a long time, there was really only a singular voice for a whole new generation, especially in a world where we are getting more adult themed turtles elsewhere. Pick up the comics, go check out other adaptations. We have had plenty and continue to have plenty of examples of different flavors than just this one. I will say for older shellheads, it is sophomoric at times. The choice of enemies definitely gives me 87 vibes, where it's very centered around either mutants or robots, and it's very specifically non-human enemies. But ultimately, getting compared to 87 is a compliment for the show. There are certainly some takes out there. This is definitely one of the more divisive versions of the Turtles that I've seen in a minute, which again surprises me considering we all saw the same movie. But this isn't trying to be 2003 or even 2012. Like I said, it's telling stories, it's developing characters, it's remembering who the target audience for this one is. And remembering that matters when engaging with something that's 40 years old. Also, maybe the occasional reminder that cursing into a camera about a show ultimately aimed for kids also isn't the best look, but that's your friendly PSA for today. All in all, a solid addition to the legacy of the Turtles. So, spoilers ahead, we're getting into the actual show here. All in all, I really thought it was clever to tell the story in a storytelling format. Tales of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles in both sides of the season was well done. You got a comic book story, you got Leo writing his comic book in the first half, you got Splinter telling a story in the second half, but it served to help justify the format of the show rather than just calling it Tales from the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles because of that being a pre-established name. The first part showcased the individual turtles in an effort to build up the team. Every single one of these turtles is a teenager, and so getting development for the individuals in an effort to develop the team as a whole is, I would argue, necessary. If even lighthearted, you're going to take this world, these characters, and telling the story seriously. The second part uses the team as a means for exploring the world around them and showing that the world has stakes and consequences, that the things that happened to set this whole thing in motion with Mutant Mayhem, we're going to find have long lasting ramifications on the world around them. All in all, I think it handles the Turtles world well. In episode 3, they started to show us reimagined versions of classic characters or teams with the intro of the Purple Dragons. If you are making your main character's teenager in such an overt way, it really makes sense that you're not going to write the main antagonists as being big, hulking, menacing adults. That's just the reality of this particular world, and I think it works. We are developing characters with unique identity that are being used to wink and nod and, yes, correct some aspects of a franchise that's 40 years old. You've got Hun, and you've got Raph, who calls him Gigantor. And he turns around and says, it's not okay to comment on a person's size just because they're bigger. Yeah, we're not in the 80s anymore, and that's okay. It's okay to have examples of a different way of doing things. Anything that's 40 years old and has so many iterations is going to have certain parts that you'd rather move away from. Speaking of Raph, I love the character work. I think Raph's character in this is brilliant and does a great job of acting as the foil for the situations that he's in. Likewise, I think Bishop is a fresh villain with a familiar feeling. Definitely that same flavor of villain in episodic Saturday morning storytelling, but we're not just bringing back one of the countless villains that seem to be at the forefront of the conversation all too often. I'm not saying they're not quality villains, but there is absolutely room to showcase somebody who hasn't been shown in basically every other iteration. And like I said before, having the motivations set by the movie, brilliant touch. One thing that stands out to me as we get what amounts to part one of the season is the progression of the arc with Bishop. It's the first time that I remember seeing the Turtles played as inexperienced. You can argue whether or not they've ever actually been teens before, but this feels like the first time that in TV they are doubling down on the age thing with inexperience in their roles within the team being used as the launching point to remind you that they are outside of their depth. And how they handle the characters of each one is what modernizes and differentiates it from 87. It's the same feeling, but definitely played specifically within that teen world. There's an exploration of purpose, identity, self improvement, limitations, while still keeping it an action based Saturday morning cartoon absolutely aimed young with gifts to older fans along the way, like the nods to the toys with the van or the nods to the turtles in time with the costume. And we cannot forget about Metalhead. Such a clever way of establishing this character by using one of Bishop's creations and rewiring. I think the shift from Bishop being the direct threat to the robots being the direct threat was good. Last the Turtles know, they've been in this uneasy truce which keeps her around for future stories while giving a villain to conquer to finish off, like I said, part one of the season. Part two does a lot of work for expanding the immediate world around them and establishes that other mutants exist by way of the East River Three. Not all mutants think the way that the mutanimals and the turtles think. An interesting cue up for telling a story separated by perspective and focus, with Splinter being the one that tells the story, breaking it up into individuals. Separating the turtles again in order to see each one individually grow and help flush out the characters around them and be the catalysts for the characters around them growing as well. The East River Three are after this pearl, and clearly the boss, Bad Bernie, is designed to be in the likeness of Rat King, tying in Splinter's relationship with the rats that we see in his focused episode, exploring him not wanting to leave the sewers while they're flooding. This did exactly as advertised and helped to give a live-in world that goes beyond just the turtles and the mutanimals. It's interesting, as a longtime Mikey fan, he definitely comes across as the most developed character out of everybody. And that's largely because this series and that's largely because these that they most commonly have just rough around the edges, underdeveloped. So you've got Leo going through his character arc of figuring out what does it mean to be a leader. You've got Donnie. Yes, he's the tech guy. Yes, he's the analytical guy, but he's struggling with instinct versus analysis. You've got Raph, who's a hothead. They even have the token meditation scene with Splinter and Raph. That is one of those nods, one of those treasures for the older Shellheads, calling back to the movies, calling back to the comics, where he needs to chill out. He needs to think things through more. He needs to not be so impulsive and so angry. Mikey is figuring out how to develop as a person, but he's still so laid back and already in the lane largely that he is going to continue to occupy, that it kind of comes across like he's definitely more developed than at least the rest of the turtles, which I thought was an interesting take because that's not usually how that goes. All in all, I think it was well done. For the fan, this is absolutely another solid entry. If you haven't checked it out yet, I would certainly check it out. Just remember who this is for, and I think that goes a great distance in being able to appreciate this for what it is. And like I said, chime in below and let me know, do you want me to do a full guide on finding your flavor of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles? Sound off below. While you're down there, go ahead and hit subscribe, tick that bell so that way you don't miss another upload. But until next time,